Inside the human skull, 4.2 centimeters behind the ear canal, sits the densest bone in the body, the petrous temporal bone. Flesh dissolves in weeks. This bone survives 10,000 years underground, intact. Paleogenomics facilities certified by international review boards are the only places permitted to handle ancient petrous samples. The DNA inside them does not degrade. It waits. Centuries ago, a text was pulled from circulation, removed from canon, hidden in monastery archives, called heretical. 3 things happened to it: banned, buried, declared dangerous. Then, in the highlands of Ethiopia, one complete manuscript surfaced, written in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. 1. Out of everything that was removed, one full copy survived. That single manuscript changed the status of everything the text claimed. What had been dismissed as legend was suddenly a document. And what that document records is this: that the deeds of every living person are written into a sealed physical record, one that opens at judgment. That is not poetry. That is a thesis. In the next several minutes, you will see how ancient text, molecular biology, and the structure of human bone all converge on exactly the same claim, from exactly the same evidence, separated by thousands of years. If forbidden biblical history surfaces here every week, and it does, hit subscribe. What was removed keeps returning, and it always carries evidence. The manuscript that preserves this claim is held in Addis Ababa, at the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's own archive. The passage comes from the 47th section of 1st Enoch, verses 3 and 4, transcribed in the Ge'ez Codex that Dr. Michael Knibb translated for Oxford University Press in 1978, a translation that remains the standard academic reference today. Knibb rendered the passage carefully. The books are opened before the Lord of Spirits. The sins of every person are written there. The holy ones who dwell in the heavens above weigh them. Now here is where the language demands attention. The Ge'ez word used for those books is mashaf. It does not mean vision. It does not mean prophecy. Mashaf means a written physical record, a document, something inscribed, preserved, retrievable. Enoch is not describing a metaphor. He is describing an archive, a ledger, something that holds data about a person and holds it permanently. He had no framework for molecular biology, no microscope, no sequencing technology, no knowledge of nucleotides or base pairs or the double helix. None of those concepts existed in any language available to him. Yet the text he produced describes, with structural precision, a physical record of a person's deeds, sealed inside the body, that survives death and opens at judgment. That is not allegory reaching for a concept. That is a description matching a mechanism that science would not identify for another 2,500 years. In 2003, the Human Genome Project published the first full sequence of human DNA. What that project confirmed, in 3.2 billion base pairs of chemical data, is that every human body carries a complete biological record of itself. Not a summary, not an impression, a full molecular inscription of identity, history, and inherited information, encoded in every cell, in a chemical language stable enough to survive millennia when the surrounding tissue is gone. The bone protects it. The petrous temporal bone, specifically, acts as a vault. Researchers at the Natural History Museum in Copenhagen, publishing in Nature in 2015, confirmed that petrous bone yields ancient DNA at success rates up to 70 times higher than any other skeletal element. 70 times. The rest of the skeleton crumbles towards silence. This one bone holds the record open. The Ge'ez term mashaf, physical written record, and the genomic term sequence, ordered chemical inscription, describe the same architecture.
One was written in an Ethiopian manuscript, copied from sources that predate the Common Era. The other was published in peer-reviewed journals at the turn of the 21st century.
same structure, same function, same permanence. The ancients called it a heavenly book opened at judgment. We call it a genomic sequence extracted from petrous bone. Same data, different era. And Enoch does not stop at identity. The Mashaf does not merely record who a person is. According to the text, it records what a person has done. Deeds, actions, patterns of behavior across a lifetime. This is where the parallel stops being merely structural and becomes something more precise. Because the biological record sealed inside bone does not only carry identity, it carries something the science of the last decade has only begun to measure: a chemical annotation of experience, written into the genome itself, layer by layer, across a life. That layer of the record has a name, and what it preserves goes far beyond a name or a bloodline. It encodes the weight of a life. But the record encoded in bone goes deeper than identity alone. There is a manuscript held in the British Library under catalogue reference Oriental 485. It is written in Ge'ez, the classical Ethiopic tongue. It was translated into English by Dr. Michael Knibb of King's College London, whose 1978 Oxford University Press edition remains the standard scholarly reference for the text. The passage in question describes the bones of the righteous as sealed containers of witness, permanent, indestructible, set apart from every other part of the body, precisely because of what they hold. The Ge'ez word is etzem, bone. But in the context of this passage, etzem does not simply mean skeletal matter. In classical Ethiopic usage, etzem carries the weight of essence, of permanent record, of the thing that cannot be taken away. When Enoch uses etzem in reference to the witness that survives death, he is not speaking loosely. He is identifying a specific container, a vault inside the body that holds testimony that outlasts the flesh surrounding it. He had no laboratory, no electron microscope, no genomic sequencer. Yet he isolates, by name and function, the one structure in the human body that modern science has confirmed is the most durable biological archive in existence. In 2014, a team of researchers published findings in the journal Nature. The study was led by evolutionary geneticist Eske Willerslev and his colleagues at the University of Copenhagen. Their subject was the petrous bone, the dense, pyramid-shaped portion of the temporal bone that encases the inner ear. What they found changed the field of ancient DNA research permanently. The petrous bone yields between 70 and 100 times more retrievable ancient DNA than any other bone in the human skeleton. Femur, rib, jaw, none of them come close. The petrous bone is so mineralized, so structurally fortified, that it functions as a natural time capsule. It resists decay, resists contamination, and preserves genetic information across timescales that should make preservation impossible. The team successfully extracted and read complete genetic histories from petrous bone samples more than 10,000 years old. Not fragments, complete, readable sequences. Ancestry, migration, disease exposure, biological identity, all of it intact, sealed inside a structure roughly the size of a walnut, positioned deep inside the skull. Enoch wrote about etzem as the seat of permanent witness. Willerslev's team, working more than 2 millennia later, identified the petrous bone as the body's most permanent biological archive. Same location, same function, different century. The ancients called it sealed testimony. We call it preserved ancient DNA. The mechanism is identical, but this is where it gets disturbing. Because the data locked inside that bone is not simply biological. It is not only a record of who you were. The research that followed the 2014 Nature paper began to reveal something the field had not anticipated. The petrous bone does not just hold your genetic identity, It holds a chemical record of what happened to you. Every stress, every exposure, every event that left a mark on your body at the cellular level. All of it, written into the marrow in a language that does not decay. And Enoch named that language, too. The manuscript reference is Oriental 485, British Library, Ge'ez text, Nib translation, 1978. The passage comes from the section scholars index as First Enoch, verses covering the condemnation of sinners and the nature of the record that rises against them at judgment. Nib renders the key lines this way: that deeds and words are written, that they rise as witnesses, that nothing spoken or done in the body disappears. It is a forensic claim, not metaphor, not poetry, a claim about the persistence of a record. The Ge'ez verb used for the rising of these witnesses is nesa'ah. It means to lift up, to be carried forward, to ascend into evidence. In Ethiopic legal and scribal tradition, nesa'ah is the word used when testimony is brought before a court. When Enoch writes that deeds nesa'ah at judgment, he is using the precise language of a record being submitted, not remembered, submitted, as physical evidence. He had no knowledge of cellular biology, no framework for epigenetics, no concept of chemical modification at the molecular level. Yet the mechanism he describes, deeds and words persisting inside the body, rising intact as witnesses, matches, with precision that should not be possible, one of the most significant discoveries in modern biological science. Epigenetics is the study of changes to gene expression that do not alter the underlying DNA sequence. The genome stays the same, but lived experience leaves chemical annotations on top of it. Methylation tags, histone modifications, molecular marks that switch genes on or off, that alter how the body reads its own instructions, and that persist inside cells long after the experiences that created them have ended. Researchers at institutions including the Salk Institute and Mount Sinai Hospital in New York have documented that trauma, chronic stress, famine, and sustained moral and psychological states all leave measurable epigenetic marks on bone cells. These are not metaphorical impressions. They are chemically distinct, quantifiable modifications. A forensic examiner, given the right sample, can read the record of what a person endured. The marks are there. They do not dissolve. They do not fade with time the way memory does. And here is the century bridge. Enoch describes deeds rising as witnesses, nesa'ah, carried forward, submitted as evidence. Epigenetic forensics confirms that the chemical record of lived experience persists post-mortem, intact inside bone cells, readable by anyone with the tools to look. Same mechanism. One described in ancient Ge'ez, one confirmed in peer-reviewed molecular biology, both pointing to the same conclusion: the body keeps the record. The impossible knowledge beat is this: Enoch had no word for methylation. He had no concept of histone modification, but he described, with the vocabulary available to him, a system in which the deeds of a life are encoded inside the body, preserved, and made available as evidence at a future point of reckoning. That is not a poetic approximation. That is a functional description of epigenetic forensics written 2,000 years before the field existed. But here's what makes this stranger. The marks do not stop with the person who made them. The record does not seal itself at death. It moves forward, into the next generation, and the one after that. The passage is again drawn from Oriental 485, the Ge'ez manuscript held in the British Library, Nib's 1978 translation. The verses in question address the fate of those whose transgressions are sealed and carried forward, not merely as consequence, but as record. Nib's rendering is careful and precise. The sins of the fathers are sealed in their flesh and passed to their children. The text does not describe punishment by proxy. It describes transmission of record, a biological inheritance of written evidence. The Ge'ez word at the center of this passage is dam, blood. In classical Ethiopic, Dom is not simply the fluid in the body. In scribal and theological usage, Dom denotes lineage, transmitted essence, the thing that passes from parent to child and carries with it everything the parent was. When Enoch uses Dom in the context of sealed transgression, he is describing an inherited moral archive, a record written in the blood and carried forward through generations in the body itself. He had no knowledge of methylation inheritance, no concept of transgenerational epigenetic transmission. He was working with the vocabulary of ancient Ethiopic scribal tradition. Yet what he describes maps, with a precision that demands attention, onto one of the most contested and consequential findings in modern epigenetics. Transgenerational epigenetic inheritance is the documented phenomenon by which epigenetic modifications, the methylation tags and histone marks that record lived experience, are passed from parent to child without alteration to the underlying DNA sequence. Research published in journals including Nature Neuroscience and Cell has demonstrated that these inherited marks persist across 3 to 4 generations. The children and grandchildren of individuals who experienced famine, trauma, or severe chronic stress carry measurable epigenetic signatures of those experiences in their own cells. They did not live through the events, but the record of those events was written into the biological archive they inherited. The impossible knowledge beat is precise. Enoch describes sins sealed in Dom, in blood, carried forward in flesh to subsequent generations. Modern transgenerational epigenetics confirms that the chemical record of lived experience is inherited across multiple generations, encoded in the same biological material, readable in descendants who never experienced the original events. Enoch named the mechanism. Science confirmed the mechanism. 2,000 years apart. And then there is forensic genealogy. A single petrous bone fragment, recovered from an archaeological site, can now be used to reconstruct complete ancestral lineages. Researchers at the Copenhagen Group and affiliated institutions have demonstrated that from one walnut-sized piece of dense skull bone, analysts can trace family connections, migration patterns, and inherited biological signatures spanning dozens of generations. The entire ancestral archive, sealed inside one structure, available for reading. Enoch's Dom, the inherited record carried in flesh, and the transgenerational epigenetic signatures now routinely extracted from ancient petrous bone. Same transmission pathway, same archive, same bone. One named in Ge'ez, one measured in methylation percentages and genomic sequencing reads. The century bridge closes here. What Enoch called the sealing of sin in the blood of the fathers, science now calls inherited epigenetic modification. What he called the flesh of children bearing the record forward, researchers now call transgenerational methylation inheritance. The language changed. The mechanism did not. But the text does not stop at inheritance. It names the moment the record is read. Right now, petrous bones in museums across the world hold unread genetic testimony, sitting in cataloged drawers, waiting. The Ge'ez manuscripts at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France are publicly listed, MS Eth32, checkable today by anyone with a library access request. And inside your own skeleton, epigenetic markers are being written and rewritten with every decade you live. The archive is not historical, it is active. Enoch described a judgment built on sealed physical records. Forensic genomics describes the same mechanism in different language. The record is still running. What do you think is written inside your own bones? Leave it below. We surface what the ancient record buried every week.